First things first, the ceremonial sticking of the sticker. Namaste. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Colour Cave where we like to play with art stuff. My name is Jem and today we are going to be testing out the Leuchtturm sketchbooks. If you're new here, these videos are designed to help you pick out a sketchbook. There's so many on the market and I've been drawing for 4 years and even I still haven't found my dream sketchbook, and there's so many factors that affect it. So basically what we do here is we take every medium imaginable and fling it at the paper just to see what it can do, and we talk about how it goes down, how it affects the paper, and also how it feels going down as well, and obviously how it looks, just to help you make a more informed decision for your next sketchbook. So there is a story behind this one. Originally we got a Leuchtturm sketchbook from this range in an upcrate, and that was back at the tail end of 2020, and I absolutely fell in love with it. But it was like a letterbox format, it was about this size, and I like a square sketchbook. I found out from reading the information in the Upcrate magazine that they do indeed do square format ones. Now the reason I like these sketchbooks, there's many reasons why I wanted to try this one out, but initial impressions from that Upcrate video, graphite pencil went down beautifully in this, and in that box was fine liners and graphite, and that was it. It was a very simple box, so I was super excited to get one of these, but I didn't test any other supplies in it, so that's what we're going to do today. Mr. Jem actually bought me one of these as a gift for my Christmas a couple of years ago, and I'm really excited that this is going to be my sketchbook. So the main features of this book, it's 150 GSM paper, which is a nice middle ground for a sketchbook. It'll probably take a tiny bit of water, maybe use water-soluble pencils in them, but probably not much more than that without causing buckling or damaging the integrity of the paper. This square format I absolutely love as well, but there's a few other things as well that I really like about it too. So first of all, we've got this elastic fastening, so when your sketchbook starts to get a bit more well used, the pages tend to sort of puff up a bit, and if you're the type of person that slots things in, this just helps keep everything together. Now, in addition to that, I love a sketchbook with rounded corners on it as well. It just stops them looking really dog-eared and knackered when you get that little bit further through, or if you're a person that takes your sketchbook everywhere with you. So in addition to that, if I just open up this front cover, we do have a page in the front here you can put your information in, but I also love the fact that we get ribbon markers with these as well. These are really handy. Now these sketchbooks, the way that they're bound as well, when you spread them out, the pages lie flat. So if you want to work all the way across the page, either left to right or otherwise, you can do that at any point in the sketchbook and you'll have a nice flat surface, and you don't have to worry about the spine, going in like this. And if you're drawing in the middle of it, that's just not a thing. So this is a very well built, a very well manufactured sketchbook. The paper is bright white, and I'm not fussy whether it's ivory or bright white paper. That's just, that can be down to preference. So they give you some stickers to put on the cover if that's what you want to do. And this one has a keepsake pocket in the back as well, and I'm a huge fan of this. If I've got a little doodle or something that I've done, I can just tuck it in there for later. I love the fact that one of the ribbons is stripy as well. That stupid things make me so happy. Other information you're given about this sketchbook, there's 112 pages, so that's substantial. That'll keep you going for a little while. And it says here, ideal for classic sketching with pencils, felt pens, markers, charcoal, pastels and chalk. And we will be testing out all of those supplies in this book. The paper is acid free, so what that means is it won't yellow over time, which is really nice as well. And this particular colour is attractively called lemon. Right, so let's get down to testing some supplies. Now the way that I normally do this is I take the back page. Now when I say the back page, I mean the first available page that is the paper that's throughout the sketchbook. There's usually a stiffer page that's made of card in behind there, and it's just how they bind them, and you can see that's been glued there, that will not lie flat. So this page here is going to be my test page, not this one, because this reflects the true nature of the paper in the sketchbook. So let's get this rolling and start simple. As I say, I did test out fine liners and graphite pencils in the original sketchbook that I got in the upcrate. I will put a link to that video down in the description, and also the end card if you want to watch a little bit of Vintage Cave and see how we came about to find out about these sketchbooks. So I'll go through this fairly quickly. I've got a range of fine liners here, and there was one that bled through, and I do believe that was a Rotring one. So we'll see how the rest of these fare. So this is a really chunky, I can't even call this a fine liner, but that's got quite a lot of ink flow, and the paper's relatively smooth. There is a little bit of tooth to it, but it's not immediately apparent, which gives you a nice balance between able to use things like markers and things like pencil, which is obviously what I like to do. So that was a Micron 12, so that is a big chunky one. The other fine liners I've got here, I've got a Micron PN, which is a plastic nib. And again, for me, this is all about flow and how well it goes down on the paper and how the ink actually sits on the paper. Now, this feels okay because there's a bit of texture. I'm not getting a nice smooth line, and I can see there very slightly. It'll be difficult for you to see that, but there is actually a tiny little bit of feathering there. So the plastic nib's not faring as well. I also have a brush tip here, so this is the Pigma brush, and this will be interesting because obviously these are quite juicy. And that seems to be quite nice actually. I like the texture that shows through the paper as well with things like this. And when we're putting down much more delicate marks, there's no issues there at all. And the brush tip feels as if it's gliding over the paper quite well, so you'll be able to get some consistency as well. I've also got another couple of brands of fine liner here to try as well, just so we're not sticking with the same brand. So I've got a Unipin fine liner, which is, again, that's a brand I use quite a lot, and I'm expecting the same sort of results from this. And there we go, I can fill in, I can block in areas. This is a 1.0. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of feathering or bleed. Nice consistent lines. Yep, that's fairly nice. I would say that goes down nicer than the Pigma ones on this particular paper. And I've also got the Faber-Castell Eco Pigment, or Eco Pigment. This is a much finer fine liner. Now that feels a little bit scratchy. It may be to do with the nib size though, but I wanted to give you as much variation here as possible. It seems okay writing with it though. So all in all, so far, in terms of fine liners, we seem to be doing quite well. And if I turn over the page here, we're looking for any ghosting or bleed through, because obviously when we have a sketchbook we want to use both sides of the paper as much as possible. And even this really dark mark that I made here, there's the tiniest hint of it there, but in a sketchbook that's not going to, that's not going to make a difference to you. So I'm quite happy that this paper is thick enough to take something like that, even if you're being quite heavy-handed with it, going back and forth. In terms of graphite pencils, I've got a soft pencil and a hard pencil here. So I've got an H pencil. An H pencil is a hard pencil, so we're not expecting anything spectacular here. It would be nice to be able to have construction lines of varying shapes and widths, and even if we press a little bit harder, and if I run my finger over that, there shouldn't be much smudge. And the graphite is sticking to the paper, that's absolutely perfect. And I've also got here a 3B pencil, so a much softer pencil, and this is where I get excited and everyone's like, yeah, you're a bit strange, Gem. But what we want to be able to do with this is make some really nice marks, and I just love the texture comes through the paper with graphite. Like, it's my favourite thing in the world when it comes to art. But we can build this up now. I remember this from the original unboxing with the original sketchbook. Even though this isn't a really textured paper, we can build up a good couple of layers there, and you can see how dark we can get that, and that's just a 3B. But also this is where you can use smudging to your advantage. So if I just rub my finger in that, you can see there that graphite is starting to travel. Now that's a technique that some people like to use, other people don't. Personally I don't, but it's just good to know that we can do that. And also the erasability in this sketchbook is really good too. My poor needed eraser here, but I can cut a line through here. And you can see it's taking away quite a chunk of that graphite as well. Obviously when you press really hard and you've got lots of layers, you're unlikely to be able to erase it, but generally at that point you shouldn't really be erasing, you should be erasing construction lines more than something like a 3B, but I just wanted to demonstrate that. Okay, so moving along into more exciting things, I've got a couple of gel pens here. I've got a Uniball Signal gel pen here in gold, but this is something I use quite a lot. But I've also got a Staedtler Tri-Plus fine liner, so a coloured fine liner, and I've also got a Jelly Roll metallic here just to see how these behave on the paper. Now I've deliberately picked purple for the fine liner because again, it's, if anything's going to bleed through or ghost, it's more likely to be the darker colours. If I do a little block of colour here, and again that feels nice going down on the paper, so if you're the kind of person that likes to get creative with your line work and maybe use different types of pens rather than just a standard fine liner, then that feels quite nice to work with. I would be happy to use that in this sketchbook too. Gel pens are always a source of contention for me. Generally, I don't get on very well with them. Gel pens and I aren't really friends, but I do persevere with this gold one. But I want to see how it sits on the paper. Ooh, it's not very consistent. That's a bit underwhelming. Yeah, it's a bit sad on here. So that's mildly disappointing. Again, I don't think that could be more down to operator error than the actual paper. Now these metallic jelly rolls, when they're dry, they leave a beautiful sparkle behind them that's not immediately obvious. So I'm really interested to see how this looks. And when it's first going down here, honestly, it doesn't look great. I'm going to come back and do a couple of layers here just to see if we can layer it up as well. But that's not sitting particularly well on the paper, so that is something to note. Okay, we'll come back to this in a little minute. Just following along on the pen theme, I have got kind of the obvious ones that are going to bleed, but I want to see the extent of the bleed. I have a bog standard permanent marker, and I am fully expecting to have some sort of bleed through, and it's feathering out around the edges straight away, which again I would expect. Marker paper, especially for alcohol markers, is quite a specialised type of paper. But I always find that in my sketchbook, you know, sometimes I use a combination of things, so it's more like to see if we can get away with it, like just a little bit of it. A perm marker. It's a curly marker. That was a terrible joke, I'm sorry. The other thing I've got here that's likely to bleed is some alcohol markers, so these are the Copic markers, and I've deliberately got a dark colour and a light colour, so I wanted to see the extent of the bleed and how much it actually, you know, shows through on the other side of the paper. So the paper is soaking that up like a sponge. That's soaking in really quickly. That's dry already, oh my goodness. So in one tiny part here, I'm just going to put a couple of layers down, because again we need to assess the extent of the bleed more than anything. Okay, our metallic jelly roll really isn't faring well at all. It looks as if it's struggling on the paper a little bit. Let's go back over it and see what happens. Oh, much better on a second layer. Oh goodness me. Right, okay. Now there we go. If you're going to use something like a jelly roll, you need to go for 2 layers, because that first layer again just seems to have soaked into the paper, so the paper seems quite absorbent, but that metallic element is standing out a little bit more in the second coat. So if we turn the page over now, as expected, you can see this mark here from the Copic markers. It's actually gone on to the following page, but if I bring this over, you can see the permanent marker and the alcohol markers have soaked straight through, which again is expected. So if you want to use both sides of the page in this sketchbook, avoid alcohol markers. Now I have to say, the bleed through is not terrible. You know, in terms of hitting the next page, it's actually not that bad. So if you could probably sacrifice the back of one page if you wanted to do an alcohol drawing in here. Okay, so we've got some water-based markers as well. These are the Caron Brush Marker Pros. These are water-soluble pens with beautiful brush tips on them. I'm not a huge marker fan, but I like these so much that I actually bought myself a set, so that tells you how I feel about them. Now these tend to be hit or miss in terms of bleed through, and it does usually depend very much on the paper. So let's see. I've got a very delicate colour here. And again, I'll layer up a little bit like I did with the Copics just to show you. And I've got this rather attractive shade of magenta, which is just fabulous. Look at that. Now what's interesting about these straight away is they seem to behave really well on this paper. Like, these pens like this paper, and you'll have heard me talk a lot in other videos about compatibility of paper versus supply, and it's a bigger factor than people think sometimes. It depends how fussy you are as well, but for me, I like optimum supplies with optimum paper, because then you don't feel as if you're fighting to get where you need to go with what you're drawing. There's a tiny bit of feathering, but it's not much, and it's right where I started that pen stroke at the top of the magenta there. So I would be satisfied that there's minimal feathering, enough for me to want to use these in my sketchbook. And that's taken a little bit longer to soak in than the alcohol markers, which again I would expect, to be fair, because it's water-based. So after one layer, there's a bit of ghosting from the Caron brush marker, especially with the magenta being a richer colour, but again, not bad. And for me, I would be perfectly happy to draw in this sketchbook on the other side with no issues. It might be a different story though if we put another layer down, and that's what I'm interested in, because we want to know how much we can push these things. Now, even just putting that second layer down, I can feel it pulling the paper up. You know, the paper starts to feel like it's a bit bobbly. I think if you went lightly, you know, if you were careful and went light-handed, you could maybe get a couple of layers. But you can see the difference there in the texture of the paper between this part with 2 layers and this part with 1 layer. And that is very slightly, just very slightly there's a few tiny little dots that are starting to sort of peek through to this side. Okay, just to finish off on the marker situation, I have a couple of paint markers here. So I've got two of the Posca paint markers, and I've deliberately picked quite deep, rich colours for the same reasons as we've done these. But I've also got the Molotov One for All acrylic twin marker as well. So I just want to see, I'm more interested in how these go down and the opacity of them than how they affect the paper here. But again, it's just a good reference point for anyone. So you can see that olive green colour, which I love, by the way. It's going down fairly well. I used quite a light pressure there, you know, I wasn't hammering away at the paper. But I want to see if we can layer these up and how much it affects the actual paper. Now you're getting a much more consistent flat colour with these ones, and that's one of the reasons that these are growing on me. I've used Posca pens forever. I like these because they seem to give you a better flat colour, and also they're refillable and Poscas aren't. So we'll give that a waft, we'll let that dry. We'll come back to that in a little minute. Okay, so I'm going to move on to pencils now. And this is more important for me because I tend to do things in my sketchbook and pencil. But I have got very soft coloured pencils. So I've got 2 Prismacolor pencils here, but I've also got 2 hard coloured pencils, which is the Derwent Artist colours as well, just to see the difference between them and how they behave as well. I'm going to start here, and I really enjoy the fact that this paper doesn't look as if it's got much texture, and then you stick some coloured pencil down on it and all of a sudden it just pops out at you. So with the soft pencils, I want to see if I can get some layers down, which I can, but I also want to mash this into the paper to see if I can just get block colour and really, you know, get rid of that tooth of the paper, and I can. Now with the Derwent Artist pencils, these are a really hard pencil and these were really designed for detail. Now I can still get a fairly smooth block of colour there, which is really good actually. Obviously it's not going to be the same as up here because this is not what they're designed for. But you know, like there we go, there's a couple of layers, that's fairly good. If I wanted to draw some very specific lines, and the paper's taken that like a boss. And again, if you just want to put down a couple of really hard lines, absolutely no issues. Okay, I'm just going to jump back to these paint markers now. Now in their current state, there's minimal ghosting on the back. It is there, but not a huge deal. Nothing soaked through. So this paper is actually quite robust. So what I'm going to do now is, obviously this is testing the layers as well, and it is dry. That's only been a couple of minutes. I'm able to go over the top. The paper's not complaining at all, which is great. And let's see if we can do a couple of layers. Now, I feel that the paint in the Molotov markers is just a little bit thicker, which is why we get this lovely block colour. I mean, that's gone down amazingly on this paper, which I'm quite surprised about, but I'm happy. Continue to layer up. So we'll keep going back to this. That's 2 layers and we'll have a look on the other side. And so far, the paper's not complaining because the paper usually does start to buckle very slightly at the application point, and that hasn't happened yet, which is good. So us talking about that, the buckling brings us nicely onto the next part. I have a few water-soluble pencils here. So start with an obvious, let's start with some watercolour pencils. So I have here the Albrecht Dürer watercolour pencils by Faber-Castell. These are pretty reliable. And first of all, I want to see how they go down as a pencil, because that's one of the joys of having a watercolour pencil, is the versatility of it, and that's kind of behaving a lot like the Prismas there. And I find that the watercolour pencils are slightly softer than the Polychromos, which is the oil-based coloured pencils that come in the same colour range. In terms of pencil form, they're great, and I really do think this sketchbook was designed with pencil in mind. I get that feeling with the paper. Either that or they secretly tapped into my brain and went, let's do something that Gem would want, because they've succeeded so far. Okay, so I've just got a little water brush here, and this is just for the sake of not making a mess. Oh, look at that. We'll talk a little bit more about how the pigment actually travels when we come to test out actual watercolours, but it seems very easy to move this around, and the pencil marks that I have made originally aren't stubborn and like holding onto the paper, so that gives you lots of room for manoeuvre. Okay, I'm just going to go back to my Molotov marker now, and when I've turned this over, there is a tiny bit of buckling at the source site. It's like a little dimple in the back of the page there. And that's two very thick layers, so we'll go a third layer just for fun and see what happens, shall we? And I can feel the paper starting to complain a wee bit, like I can feel it dragging under my hand. So I think 3 might be the limit. But as for the Albrecht Dürers, that's amazing, and yeah, I'm really happy with that. So following along that vein, I have got the Derwent Graphite pencils. Now this is a water-soluble graphite, so again, designed to be moved about and designed to be squished about with water. I know that's very technical. Now that feels okay going down on the paper. It's a little bit more reluctant, but again, these pencils do tend to be because they're such an odd hybrid. The paper's okay with a little bit of water. There's not anything, you know, that's still completely flat up there, so that's cool. I love these Graphite pencils, look at that, that's amazing. Again, really easy, the paper's making it nice and easy for me to just squish that about, do what I want with it. No hassles. Can pull out the colour a little bit as well. Superb. I find this very encouraging because this is a really nice way, if you do want to use a bit of water and have a painterly technique, these types of water soluble pencils are ideal for it because you can do it with a water brush and you don't need loads of paintbrushes and palettes and blah blah blah. The Molotov marker is still dry and it's still not dry, and the paper, that little pocket, that little dinkle I was talking about is getting deeper. So I would say 3 layers is probably your limit, but there is no bleed through onto this part of the page. And you can see there's actually no bleed through, it's just becoming more and more obvious that it's there. Okay, for our final water-soluble pencil, I've got the Derwent Inktense. Now I wanted to try these specifically because these are an ink-based pigment. So I'm going to go fairly heavy here. We've established that this paper likes pencil, and we can see that it really does. But I'm going to kind of push the boat out a little bit here. Let's really go for it. And we'll go in with our water. Oh, look! And I am able to push out those marks that I've made and this cover up the white of the paper, you know, the tooth of the paper, pretty successfully. And if you work quickly with the Inktense as well, you can get quite an even colour. It does come down to practice though, because once this pencil dries, it's very difficult to move it about on the paper again. You know, it's not permanent, it's more or less permanent. I've also got a water-soluble crayon here. I've got a Lyra aqua colour here and this rather attractive apple green, I think it is. I really don't like the texture of these. Like, it's like a wax crayon when you were a kid. I don't like the feel of it under my hand, and that's regardless of paper. But I wanted to show you this as well, just to see what we can do with this. Again, I'm expecting fairly good results here, but it is a slightly different makeup in terms of, you know, the ingredients that go into the recipe compared to a pencil. It feels very, very waxy. I always marvel at these, I think they're wonderful. Like a wax thing that's water soluble, okay. That takes a lot for my science brain to deal with. So let's see here again, in the part where I've pressed really hard, that's just amazing, look at that. And that's diluting out beautifully. Look how smooth that gradient is there, apart from this part that Jem ballsed up. But look at that, that's perfect, that's amazing. Okay, here comes the real test of the integrity of the paper. We're going to get some watercolour out. So I have here, this is the Winsor & Newton Cotman Studio set. This is just a go-to palette for me. I have replaced a few of these with the professional colours as they've run out, but for the sake of testing, it's just a palette that I had to hand. And I'm doing this proper way, and I've deliberately picked this paintbrush. This is the Jackson's Quill brush. I've picked it because it holds a lot of water. And we're going to put a little bit of a stress test on the paper with this one. So straight away, I can see the paper is like resisting the water. You know that way, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you put droplets of water on plastic, it beads up. And I feel like the paper was kind of wanting to do that a little bit there. So I've just loaded this brush with more water. And I'm just going to start messing about here. Now what's interesting is it's quite difficult for me to shift my lines. It is doing it, but I've got to put a bit of work in to shift those original lines that I've made. Can you see that there on the paper, the way it's trying to bead up? That's really interesting. So there may be a plastic coating element to this, or within the actual paper. And the water is sitting on the paper as well, so it's reluctant to absorb into the page. Yeah, you can see if I do that it's kind of like... Okay, so we're going to let that dry and we're going to test to see if we can reactivate the watercolour and also see what state the paper's in and see if we can layer up. We'll need to give that a little bit of time to dry. So moving on with the paint theme, I've got some gouache here and I have Brilliant Violet, and this is the Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache. Now I don't foresee any problems with this really. When you're using gouache, your water use should be minimal anyway. And for me personally, when I use gouache, it tends to be straight from the tube, and it's usually white gouache for highlights and things. So you want minimal dilution here. And as suspected, is going down really well. With literally just with a damp brush, it is a bit gummy, and the paper's kind of going, what are you doing to me? And there, with a little bit more water, is going down much better. Okay, that's better. That's the way it should go. So because you've got minimal water content with that, the whole paper buckling thing shouldn't be as much of an issue. But I'll be interested again to see if this goes through to the other side. And last but not least, we're getting into the realms of silliness now, but I have an actual tube. An actual tube of acrylic paint here. I expect this to go not dissimilar to what goes on with these markers, because obviously it's the same idea. Okay, so that's just paint. That's not any sort of water, because most of these acrylic paints are water-based, you can thin them out. Again, not something you're really wanting to do unless you're going for a specific look, but look at that. There you go. It's good to know. This is the fun part. I like doing the silly stuff. The gouache is drying nicely into the paper. I'm not going to spend any more time on these two particular ones because it's not something, if you were doing a full gouache piece, you would probably be doing it on mixed media paper at the very minimum, not in a sketchbook. But just for the sake of testing, I wanted this to be as comprehensive as possible, so I thought that was worth adding in there. Okay, the watercolour, the paper is buckling, it's complaining a little bit. Again, it's going to give you a wrinkly page, but at this stage, not the end of the world, and certainly not reason to say, oh, I'm not using watercolour in here. So last but certainly not least, I have some pastel here, soft pastel. So I have some pan pastel, but I also have it in stick form. I'm covered in it already. But I've got two brands as well. This is the Artful Pastels. So we're going to start with that. And that's interesting. Let's go in. This is a really soft pastel. I can't remember what brand this is, but I really, really like them. I want to say Sennelier, but they might not be. But these are super soft. That feels horrible going down on there. That does not feel nice at all. Now again, obviously we're into quite specialised supplies here, but good for the test. I've literally got this everywhere already. Oh, they're so messy. But let's see if we can get a good bit of smudge, which we can. You know, if you wanted to add a pop of colour, you could do. Now the pan pastels are a bit more expensive. They're a bit softer. And they usually behave quite well on a lot of paper. Pan pastels are something that I've used even in colouring books, and they seem to, how offensive is that colour? They seem to like everything, so I'm just going to do a finger application here. But they're much creamier than the chalk pastels, and that seems to be really happy on that paper. Wow, getting quite a nice even coverage with that as well. And again, I can pull this out and smudge it out as well. So pan pastels are a particular thumbs up. That's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. I found some charcoal. So there's some heavy pressure, there's some lighter pressure. Oh, and again, let's just, oh yeah, this paper's really good for this. Oh. And just to finish off with the pastels, I have here two of the Faber-Castell pastel pencils. Easy for me to say. And these I find can be very temperamental at the best of times. So let's see how we get on here. So yeah, they are behaving like pencils, which is nice. Yeah, they're actually going down okay. Again, we can make some bolder strokes. The paper seems to be taking that okay. Because quite often if you press hard with these pastel pencils, which you're not really supposed to do, it gives you like a scratchy line, and we're not getting any of that here. We do have a little bit of pastel dust though, but again, that's to be expected. That's really nice actually. Wouldn't be my first choice of medium in a sketchbook. Okay, so coming back to my watercolour, the paper's still damp there, and the one that's got more water in it, which is the ultramarine, is, yeah, the paper's kind of going, It's not buckled the entire sheet of paper though. First of all, I want to know, can I reactivate this in any way, shape or form? Because if I can, that means I can also lift. Now this is damp, so this is ideal conditions for lifting. And it's actually lifting a wee bit, but that is very difficult. You can see I'm scrubbing away at the paper there. It's very, very difficult to reactivate that and move it round. So I'm actually doing my best to kind of damage the paper here now, so I'm just going to keep rubbing away. And I'm actually getting the papers coming off in my fingers now. Yeah, that's pilled all the paper. So we are quite limited in terms of what we can do with watercolour on here. If you've got less water, I do believe we'll be able to put a couple of layers. So again, back to what we were talking about with the water-soluble pencils, if you don't go crazy, there is every chance that you're going to be able to you know, get a couple of layers of colour down and the paper's going to be fine. If you want to have all of your sketchbook in watercolour, you would buy a watercolour sketchbook. It is nice to know that you've got that option if you just fancy a wee change, or there's a particular thing that you think would look better in watercolour. You know, maybe just like if you're actually painting like a lake or something like that. I think you'll agree that that's a fairly comprehensive test, and everything that we've chucked at this paper, the actual sheet itself is still relatively intact and, you know, as it should be. It's not buckled or puckered or all that kind of thing. We've literally thrown everything at this and it's stood up to it really, really well. Overall, I think this is a great all-rounder, and for me personally, I'm kind of hesitant to say this, but I think I may have found the right sketchbook for me. It's only taken 4 years. But I am really, really impressed with this. And for me personally, even when it comes to using water-soluble media, I tend to steer towards pencils, and this is the whole pencil thing here is just absolutely delightful. It absolutely is. And even if I want to venture into charcoal, which I do sometimes, generally not in sketchbooks because it's so messy, but the options are there. All the options are here. The only thing that was a little bit disappointing was the jelly roll. The gel pens don't seem to get on very well in here. Unless it's a specialty of yours, it's not really a supply that people use on a regular basis in a sketchbook, so I'm not overly concerned about that. The clear winners here: fine liners, graphite, coloured pencil. Pleasantly surprised about the water soluble markers and the paint markers as well. They've done really well on this paper, and lesser sketchbooks might not take these just quite as well. So you can see there, you can actually see me without me tilting it. You can see where I've used a lot of water, but down the side here there's minimal dents in the paper, and that's where I'd use the water soluble coloured pencils. These two here, this is the watercolour paint, and they've had several layers of water. So all in all, I would say that's fairly good going. I will put recent prices up for these sketchbooks up here just now. The prices are fluctuating so much just now because there's so much going on in the world, but just to give you a ballpark figure, but these do come in a couple of sizes, shapes and colours as well, and I wanted the yellow one because myself and Papa Gem absolutely love yellow, but it has to be just the right colour of yellow, which this is. So thanks very much for watching, everyone. I really appreciate you coming to hang out. I'd just like to remind you that next Saturday evening UK time we are having a colouring live stream, and that will be 3 hours of colouring, and we're doing 3 separate projects, 1 per hour. So if you want to come and hang out, even just to listen along, even if you're not a colourist, maybe you just like coloured pencils, if you could come and join me, that would be amazing. I would love that very much. Failing that though, I still have a normal video up this coming Thursday, so I shall see you then. Have a great day everyone, stay safe, please take care of each other. Bye bye for now.